everyone, it is Jazz here, and welcome to part 1 of my February reading wrap-up. So I read 6 books in the month of February, and I had a lot of thoughts on all 6 of those books, so I thought instead of making this one really super long video, I would split this into 2 parts. But I'm still going to talk about the books that I read in February in the order that I read the books, just to have a nice variety of different types of books. Let's get part 1 of my February wrap-up started. The first book that I completed in the month of February was Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. This is sort of a companion novel to Neil's book American Gods, but it is not a sequel. Like, both books stand on their own really well and can be read separately. It's just that Anansi Boys is set in the same world as American Gods and uses one of the characters that's in American Gods. Anansi Boys is centered around a character named Charlie, aka Fat Charlie. He's basically just living his normal life, about to get married to his fiance when his estranged father dies, and then he finds out that his father was a African trickster god, and then insanity also ensues when he discovers that he has a brother that he didn't know about called Spider. After many years of starting this book and then not completing it, I have finally completed Anansi Boys. I listened to this in audiobook, and I highly recommend the audiobook. I feel like the audiobook really works for the style of book that this is and the writing style. I feel like the reader did a great job with the characters, because I think a lot of them would be kind of hard to do, so like extra super plus. And I ended up just liking this book a whole lot better than like my previous trying to readness as an audiobook. However, as a book, I liked it. I really liked it, but I didn't love it. And I really want to love my Neil Gaiman books, but it just wasn't gonna happen with this one, and that's okay. You don't have to love every book by your favorite author. It's one of those books where I can acknowledge that it is well executed, that I could see what Neil Gaiman was trying to do with the book, and he did that and executed it well, and I really, really appreciate the effort and work that went into this book, but it's not 100% my cup of tea. Now, I think a lot of why I just like this book is because of the characters. Nothing wrong with the characters particularly. It's just that I don't feel like a kindred spiritness with any of these characters. Like, I don't feel like they're like my best friend, like some of the books that I love, or like that they're maybe likably unlikable, but they're like super interesting or something like that. Either one of those, I like want to get back into the story and visit those characters. This one just had characters that I was like, oh, they're fun, they're amusing, they're cute, I like them, they make me laugh, but I didn't want to be like, I need to go visit this character right now. It is definitely more of a plot-driven story than a character-driven story, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think there is definitely a place for that, and I also think that, you know, plot-driven stories can definitely be a lot of fun, especially when they're really amusing, but it's not usually my cup of tea. I prefer a little more character-driven stories. But still, this was a pretty fun read, especially an audiobook. I really loved the descriptions of some of the characters that Neil did, and his writing style, and this was just as awesome as always, and I really appreciated that. I also really liked the theme that it studied about family and father-son relationships. It is still a pretty cool book, and I gave it 4 stars. Now, I'm actually kind of glad that I completed a funny book like Anansi Boys before I got into my next 2 books, because they were super sad. I went into the super sad book zone. I ended up rereading several books for the BookTube Rereadathon, and one of the books I ended up rereading was Katherine Patterson's Bridge to Terabitha, which centers around a character named Jess. He is a 5th grade boy, and he ends up befriending a young girl in his class named Leslie. They end up exploring the woods, and they end up creating sort of their own fantasy kingdom in this spot in their woods, and they name it Terabitha, hence the title. But then tragedy sort of strikes, and Jess has to kind of figure out how to cope with that. So I probably had not read Bridge to Terabithia since I was in grade school, which is a long time ago. And so the only thing I remembered about it was that it was sad, which it definitely has some sadness to it. I remember being a kid and going, why would you do that? Have this weird tragic moment in this book? Because I was a kid and I was like, this is a kid's book for us. Why is it sad? But I read something really interesting in the back of this book because I have the teaching edition of this, and I found out that this book was kind of centered around feelings that Katherine Patterson had when like a similar situation had happened to her son and his feelings and stuff. And so she was kind of like exploring some feelings with this book, and that made me understand the tragic moments in this book a lot more. I kind of feel like with Bridge to Terabithia, the same thing I felt with the previous book that I just talked about, and that is I do think that it is really well executed and that the author did what she set out to do, but it's maybe not 100% my cup of tea. One of the reasons for that is not actually the book's fault, it's like my mental place with this book. Since the only thing that I remembered about this was like the sad part, I kept anticipating the sad part and feeling like it was like coming, and I was like, oh no, the sad part is coming, the sad part is coming. And it kind of got in my way of enjoying like the joyful parts of this book, because there are plenty of those in here as well. So I felt like I couldn't focus on this because I kept anticipating the tragic moments. I don't know if this sounds weird, but I do think the tragic moment should have happened maybe a little tiny bit earlier in the book. It kind of happens, and then like there's only like 2 or 3 chapters till the end of the book, and I think the whole point of this book was to show how characters can like redeem their strength and get through hard times. And I feel like you could have at least spent like 3 or 4 chapters on that instead of just like 2 chapters, I think. But maybe I just wanted to rip off the tragic band-aid earlier in the book so that I wouldn't have to keep thinking about it. However, I think the real strength and the real amazing part of this book is the show would not tell quality of Bridge to Terabithia. The author really got across what the characters were about, what their families were about, and sort of their background and the way they thought so well by just showing us elements of their lives and elements of their personality, and I think that was just amazing. So even though it's not like 100% my cup of tea, I still give this 4 stars because I still think it's a book that people should read, and I still think it's deserving of its like children's classic-esque kind of storyline. Then I ended up rereading yet another book that I have not read since elementary school, and it is Out of the Dust by Catherine Hess. This is a book that is written in poetic verse, and it is set in the 1930s during the Depression as well as during the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. This centers around a character named Billie Jo. She is a girl of about 14 or so, maybe a little younger from what I can tell. And near the front of the book, a really tragic accident happens that causes her to lose her mother, and it's basically the rest of the book is about her and her father trying to survive not only the tragic loss, but also just live in Depression 1930s during the Dust Bowl. I was really glad that I still really enjoyed this book. Of course, it is in poetic verse, so it's a very fast read. Really love this historical fiction because it is about something that is not often talked about in literature, that I haven't read very much. You just don't read very much about what it might have been like in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl and how like truly like dangerous and kind of scary it is, and how it affects their lives in such like a really dramatic way. So I think that is something really cool that you just don't get to see in too many historical fictions, and I really enjoyed kind of learning something about that. And also, I really like the character of Billie Joe. I really like how her voice is written in the book. I also like that she is a musician. She like played piano and things like that, and how that kind of filtered into the story. I also really loved seeing Billie Joe's character growth and the different ways she transitioned to different states of dealing with her grief. And it's something I kind of wish had been in Bridge to Terabithia, but I will say maybe it's the fact that they did rip off the tragic band-aid near the front of this book, and so then I could kind of just like cope with it as the book went on. Even though this book is super sad in certain places, it does still have a moment of like hope in it that makes you not feel like I need to go die now. This is so sad. You know what I mean? So it's a nice balance of, you know, sadness and hope. And I think that is always a quality moment if you're gonna write a sad book. The only thing about this book is that I don't think the writing of the free verse poetry really like hits its stride and it's like really coolness until like tragedy happens. So I kind of wanted the few starting sort of poems to be a little bit more like the rest of the book. And that is literally the only reason why I gave this 4.5 stars instead of 5 stars. But I still thought it was a really excellent, fast reread, and I'm really glad that I read it again. Again? Because why? Why do I say things like that? That is part 1 of my February wrap-up. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts on these books. I will probably have part 2 up by tomorrow at the latest, depending on how editing goes, so check that out. Also, keep your eye out for my TBR video. I'm doing a just readathon TBR because I'm going to do 2 readathons instead of like a normal March TBR. So I'm gonna have that up very, very soon, probably after the second part of my wrap-up. You can go ahead and click that little subscribe button and that little bell so you get notified when I put that stuff up this week. And that is it for today, my fabulous peeps. Stay shiny